Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. I am, as always, very happy to be with you to talk to another author and bring you another interview. I hope you're having a great week so far. Hope you had a good weekend. My weekend was lovely and just hanging out with the hubby. We haven't been doing a lot of traveling lately, but spending a lot of time together with the dogs. It rained a lot this weekend, so we didn't get out much, but we stayed home. We watched Netflix. I feel like we did something and I can't remember what. Oh, we made new friends. Yes, lovely. We met a couple in our complex last weekend who recently moved here from Atlanta, although he's originally from Germany, she's originally from Thailand. They have a 4-year-old son, and they invited us to dinner on Saturday. So that's what we did on Saturday. We got to go eat some really nice Thai food in a town a little ways from here called Villamora, and we got to make new friends, and it was just lovely. So yeah, laid back, but also made new friends, and really enjoyed it. So that was that. Hope you also had a nice weekend. And then yesterday was a friend's birthday, so we spent time with her and her boyfriend. We went to dinner with them, and that was nice. Actually, strangely enough, we met two people here in Portugal. One is German and one is South African, and they both had birthdays yesterday. Although one of them, the one that we didn't have dinner with, we didn't celebrate with her because she was in London. Lucky girl. But didn't know anybody with a February 13th birthday, and now I know two. And we met them right around the same time, and actually we found out like the same day that they had the same birthday. So randomness that you get at the beginning of the episode. I'm sure you are just thrilled in all these random details that pop into my head as I am opening an episode. But at any rate, let's move on to the author, because that's what we're here for. I am, as I said at the end of the last episode, talking with returning author Louise Marburg today. She was on the podcast for the first time just a year ago, January of last year. That was episode 335, exactly 60 episodes before this. So if you are interested, if you didn't hear it the first time, you may want to go and listen to Louise's first episode. We are talking about, she writes short stories. So in this episode, we're talking about her newer collection of short stories. And in that episode, we talked about a prior episode of short stories called No Diving Allowed. This time, we're talking about a collection called You Have Reached Your Destination. So yeah, you might want to go hear a little bit more about that collection of short stories, or you might want to start with this episode. Really up to you, but I just put that out there in case you want to listen to both episodes. You don't have to go searching for them on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. Okay, as I mentioned, this collection is called You Have Reached Your Destination. I'm going to go ahead and give you the description of this collection. Author Louise Marburg captures turning points in the lives of 12 disparate women. Marburg's crisp, clear-eyed prose, infused with dark humor, reveals the inevitable collapse of pretension beneath the struggles of loneliness, death, and the all-too-human need to be seen. From a preteen attempting to understand her father's suicide to a 90-year-old caught in the shadows of past marital abuse, each of these women is made to confront the reality that change is the only certainty. The collection invites us to face ourselves and our own life journeys with sympathy, humor, and courage. Again, that is the description of You Have Reached Your Destination. It is a collection of 12 short stories, as you heard in that description. And I really liked this collection in that the overarching theme was of women at different points in their life. So while I have not necessarily experienced everything that each woman in this collection has experienced in her story, there were so many different entry points for reading these stories, for understanding what these women are going through, and for really seeing some of the phases of my own life through these stories. So I really appreciated reading the stories, and I always say that short stories can be hard for me because when I like a character, when I like a story, I always want so much more. I want that story to continue. I want to keep learning about that character, etc. And this collection for me really made me have a better appreciation for short stories because I felt like I got this snapshot of each woman's life at a specific point in time. And while, yes, there were characters that I still wanted to learn more about, I still wanted to continue with those characters, I felt more at peace. I felt like I got the closure that I needed in these particular stories that I don't always feel I get when I read short stories. So I really appreciated Louise's writing and these stories, liked the relatability of so many of the women, even though, like I said, I'm, of course, not going through everything that each person is going through. But I have been a preteen. I haven't been a 90-year-old woman yet. Here's hoping. But I have been, a woman of many of the ages that the women in these stories are and were, or however you want to put that, are, I guess, as they are continually in the present of their own stories. So, if you are a fan of short stories, this might be one that you want to check out. But let's go ahead and turn to the interview so that Louise can talk more about this collection. Hi, Louise. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me back.
I'm glad to have you here to talk about another collection of short stories. In your book, You Have Reached Your Destination. But before we do that, for people who might not have heard the first interview or need a refresher, if you could share a little bit about yourself.
Okay. I've written 3 collections of short stories. The first one is called The Truth About Me. The second one is called No Diving Allowed. And the third one that we're talking about today is called You Have Reached Your Destination. And I am primarily a short story writer, although strangely for me, I just finished a novel and I'm writing a novel. And I just don't know how I feel about that since I've been writing short stories for so long, but we'll see how that goes. I live in New York with my husband, who's a painter. And the surprising thing to everyone that I tell about my life is we work in the same room and we have for years and years and years. So obviously we see each other all day, every day. So that's how I work. It's great. I love it.
Which, that's, if it works for you, for you and your husband, that's wonderful. Not everybody can have that much together time or whatever, but I love that you're creative differently in the same space.
Yeah. And, it's just, obviously it's sort of started because we just didn't have any other space. Mm-hmm. And that's the way it is now. But originally I used to be, in a former life, I was an art director and graphic designer for publications, for magazines. So I wasn't at home, and then I became a writer, and then I was at home. So it just, continued on, and it was fine. I went to graduate school as well. So there was kind of a soft landing on staying together all day.
Mm-hmm. But you learn a lot about your relationship when you're in close quarters all the time.
Yeah, you do.
And whether that's a road trip or whatever it is. So
yeah. No, it's worked out really well. But people are always amazed by that.
Well, yeah, but you always project your own things onto other people, right?
Yeah, exactly. Married couples are like, what? I can't imagine. So. Anyway.
I have actually 2 friends who are moving together into a tiny house. And I was like, that sounds great, but is there a door you can close between each other?
Yes, the door. Yeah. I often tell people with a lot of children, close the door if you want to get any work done. Of course, we don't have a door, but we also don't have any children in the house. So that's fine.
Right.
We have pets, but that's all right.
Yeah, it makes a difference.
Yeah.
Here we are at the point of our first break for this episode, and we have not even gotten to the overview of the collection. So you're going to have to come back for that. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with author Louise Marburg. We are discussing her collection of short stories called You Have Reached Your Destination. Let's get back to that interview.
Well, as you said, the new collection is called You Have Reached Your Destination. And actually, I was laughing because just like 2 to 3 weeks ago, I interviewed an author about his memoir, and that was called Prepare for Departure. So we've come full circle.
Oh God, that's great. I love that title.
Yeah, and I just love that they were so close together. So it's kind of you never know when you schedule so far out, but there's always fun coincidences. And this
Yeah, that's great.
But can you give an overview of You Have Reached Your Destination?
Sure. You Have Reached Your Destination is a collection of 12 stories about women. Every story is about a woman, and their ages range from 12 to 90. And in every story, the protagonist, a woman, has come up against a moment in their lives, a destination. And I think that, we have many destinations in our journeys through life. And so whether it be there are deaths, there are moments of realization, there are sort of breakups of, people who love each other no longer love each other, just various and sundry moments of destination. And so it was really fun to write. It didn't start as it came out. It was just one story at a time. I did not actually set out to write a book about women, but I did write a few stories. They were about women. And for me, stories tell you what is on your mind, what you really want to explore. And so I realized that's what I wanted to explore. And I just continued writing about women. So it's 12 stories. And I think it's not that long. It's 166 pages. So not too bad. Yeah.
And I love that it came out, that's what it turned into, is that, you had a few stories about women, and then it became more, because no matter what age you are, as you're reading this, I think you're going to recognize various points in your own life. If as a woman, if you're a woman reading it, or just there's going to be a lot of entry points into these stories.
Yes, I think that's true. I mean, maybe a reader won't be interested in every one of them, but that's the beauty of short stories. You don't have to read them all.
Right. Yeah, and you don't have to read them in order. You can read whatever is kind of piquing your interest at any given moment.
Exactly. And they're great for people who don't have a lot of time and they just want to read something before they go to sleep, or they don't want to get involved in a novel. And I think that they're given short shrift because they really are a wonderful way to get involved with literature without really committing to something huge.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good point, because I like to read before I go to sleep, and when I'm in the middle of a novel, it's always one more chapter, and then you get to the end of that chapter and you're like, gotta start the next chapter. But with a short story, you're encapsulated, and that's good.
Yeah. And it only takes about 20 minutes, half an hour to read a short story. So, it's perfect. Yeah.
I think we talked a little bit about this the last time you were on the podcast, but so you had a few stories about women, and then this grew into a collection of 12 short stories. Do you often find yourself when you're working on a collection, trying to kind of have an overarching theme, or does that just depend on the collection you're working on?
Well, it's funny because as I said, I've written 3 collections and every one does have an overarching theme. And I didn't, with the first collection, I really didn't mean to do that. I just was writing and it turned out that the theme really was mental illness. Just out of the blue, I realized that's what I had done. The second collection is called No Diving Allowed. And there, in each story, there is a pool, a swimming pool. Which serves as a device, a metaphor, in many different ways it's useful. But the stories sort of are shall we say, that they happen in the pool, or they happen around the pool, or the people have a pool, or so that was something I also liked this book. I realized that I was including swimming pools in a few stories, and I thought, well, this is interesting. Why not just continue with this and put a pool in every story and see what happens? And it really was interesting to write. So that was fun. And then that was a lot like, obviously, like You've Reached Your Destination. Then I just realized that was sort of something I wanted to pursue.
Does it ever happen that you're writing stories? Like, do you tend to notice those themes, or does somebody else say, do you know that there's a pool in every story? Or
Yeah. Well, I knew that, but it's interesting because I just was talking to a friend of mine who read the book, and she said, well, your mother's in all, You've Reached Your Destination is the one she had read. And she said, your mother's in every story. And I said, really? Are there a lot of mothers in the stories? And she said, yes, what are you talking about? So I am I'm just really not that cognizant of a lot of things that go on in my stories. And I always, when you have to order the stories, put them in an order in the book, and I never do that myself. I always give that to somebody else to do because I really don't know enough about the story consciously to be able to piece them together so that there's some sort of connection.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's good to have other sets of eyes, I think.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. When you are writing, when I think about writing a longer novel and thinking about character development, that I know there's a lot that goes into that. But then I started thinking, is there more character development that goes into a short story because you have to know that character so well in order to bring them to life in a shorter period?
You do. What you have to know is you have to know them extremely well, but you have to also be able to know what are the salient details. To develop a character in a short story, you do have to know a lot about them, but on the page, you have to only say or write very little about them. So you have to pick the really salient details about them that describe more than just what you're saying. You might not describe the color of their hair, but let's say how they have done their hair would be, much more descriptive of the kind of person they are. You might not describe everything they're thinking, but a couple of things they're thinking are obviously very necessary. So whatever you are putting on the page about the character is kind of just the tip of the iceberg. Much of it is beneath the water, but it's there, it. And so you can pick out what's most important about the character, within 5,000 words or whatever, a short story length.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me the various ways that you can go about that, because there's one character in the story about, and I apologize because I'm blanking on titles right now, but the woman is going through menopause, and we see a lot of her character through how she kind of interacts or thinks about other people. But then there was another story of a woman whose mother is an alcoholic who just had a stroke and her personality changed. And with that character, I felt like I learned more about her from her interactions with other people, like how they saw her and what comments they made toward her.
Yes. It wasn't about the mother per se, but yes. Right. Yeah, definitely.
But even that main character, I felt like the daughter, I learned more about her in her interactions with her father, with her brother, with her husband, with her daughter.
And it really was about her and, her moment of grace, of forgiveness. Don't want to give anything away, but.
Right. No.
Just want everybody to read it, but.
time to take our second break for this episode. As many of you who've been listening for a while know, and as I said at the beginning of this episode, I often struggle with enjoying short stories because I want more out of them. And so I think because of that, I tend to project a lot of the anxiety I feel sometimes when I read short stories. Maybe anxiety is not the right word, but I project a lot of my own stuff onto short stories or people who write short stories. What I'm saying is that I have so many questions, so many of my own questions, of my own, like, how, why do you do that? How does it work? Kind of questions that I try not to ask the million questions that I have, maybe only 1,000 questions when I interview authors of short stories. I say that because I'm going to ask one of those questions when we come back about, do you ever want to continue with a character? Because I, as a reader, sometimes really love characters and want to keep going with that character. So here I am projecting. So we're going to take a break, and when I come back, projections. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with author Louise Marburg. Her short story collection is called You Have Reached Your Destination.
Do you ever find it difficult to keep a short story short, or do you ever want to keep going with a character, like you don't feel like you've wrapped it up sufficiently?
It's interesting. I'm often asked how I know if I've ended. And I always think, I've just got so much more to write. And then I realize, say 4,000 or 5,000 words. Oh my God, it's over. That's it. And I'm just really, it seems like I'm usually surprised at the point of ending, which is fun. All surprises are fun in writing, and writing is very surprising. Your characters will do surprising things, and a lot of it is just unconscious. Whatever's in your unconscious comes out onto the page, and you're surprised by it. And I'm always surprised by the ending. So no, I've never really thought I have to go on about this. And it's interesting starting to write novels and how you don't. In a novel, there's a lot of just going on about things. You have so much space to just write whatever. And I was looking at a paragraph the other day, or really actually a scene, thinking, was that really necessary? And I thought, this is not a story. It doesn't matter. I'll just leave that because, I had plenty of space, but I just don't do that with stories. They're very much a puzzle to me. And clicking everything into place within a certain amount of words is really the fun for me.
You actually answered my follow-up question, because I was curious, since you said you're writing a novel, that's more of a challenge since you're used to writing in a shorter form.
Yeah, it's what it is. It's sort of a challenge in the idea of committing to something longer. And I think, oh my God, this could take forever. But Actually, it takes forever to write a collection of stories. It takes me, over a year to write a collection of stories. And so it just doesn't seem like it because every story is its own thing. And you think, oh, I finished a story. And a novel just keeps going. And so the commitment to it is something I've been sort of fighting with because I'm just not used to not finishing, if that makes any sense.
Right. Yeah. And actually the fact that it takes longer to write a short story, a collection of short stories, makes sense to me too, because you have to have a different or a new idea for each story, right? Where a novel is the same storyline throughout.
Right.
For me, the starting point can be hard.
That's also a thing. Like you are stuck with the same characters in a novel for however long. I mean, some people take, years and years to write a novel. And that's another thing. You're committing to these characters that may or may not interest you through 200 pages. Whereas in a short story, you've got 20 pages and that's, you never get sick of the character because it's too short.
Right. Yeah. And if you don't like a character, you can just go to the next story. Whereas if you don't like a character, you can't just skip to the next chapter.
No. And also I will start writing a story and think, no, this is not any good, and just dump it. But with a novel, you're not going to do that. I mean, you've committed so many pages to it. You're not going to suddenly say, I don't think so. So it's a bigger thing for me, sort of emotionally or mentally, just to commit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. For this collection, did you do any types of research for any of the stories?
I do. Well, as I'm writing and I have some question about something that I'm unfamiliar with, I always have my internet on when I'm writing. A lot of people turn it off, but I Google things all the time. I mean, I'm constantly Googling as I'm writing, but my research is really my life. And every character is an amalgam of a bunch of people I've known. Every situation is the seed of it is a situation that I have been in or heard of, or so that's my research, me.
Can you talk a little bit about only if you want to and are ready, but can you talk a little bit about the premise of the novel that you're working on?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you about the premise of the novel that I'm just finished. It's a comic novel, and it's about a woman who is absolutely profane and ridiculous and also a drunk. But in the best way you can imagine a drunk being. She's just very, very funny. And she's 50 years old. The novel takes place between her 50th birthday and her 51st birthday. And she's just having a lot of trouble being, with the idea of being older. So she gets into all sorts of situations. In every chapter, she meets someone new. It's called Fancy Meeting You. And every chapter she meets someone new, and through the book, she through meeting all of these people, she gains self-knowledge. So by the end of the novel, she is a much different person than in the beginning.
In some ways, you've kind of combined novel and short story. If she meets someone new in every chapter, I like that. And
every chapter has a different title, and but they can't. Some could, I edit them to standalone, and I have placed them in journals, the ones that I've been able to edit to standalone, but they don't really stand alone. Because people from past chapters come into, subsequent chapters, and then we have someone new, and then, they meet somebody from the past chapter. So it's, it's a mix, but there's always somebody new. Yeah.
Yeah. Before we started recording, you said sometimes when people ask you what you're reading, you draw a blank. And so I'm about to ask you what you're reading.
I'm not going to draw a blank because I actually thought about it ahead of time. So,
all right. Well, what have you been reading?
Okay. What have I been reading? I don't know if your audience is familiar with the Irish author Roddy Doyle. A lot of his books have been made into movies. He is very funny normally, but he's written a collection of stories, also not that normal for him. He writes quite a few novels, called Life Without Children, and it's set in the pandemic in Ireland. And each story is about a couple and how they cope with the pandemic. And it's really interesting because we're kind of we're in the pandemics really still. And it's sort of a little too soon for there to be a lot of pandemic works out, that have that in them. I'm certainly writing one now, but now we're at the point where you can look back on lockdown and the really bad part of the pandemic. But so this is set in lockdown. It's really interesting, how people cope. And in one story, a woman takes advantage of lockdown to leave her husband, and she just walks out the door and gets herself an apartment and stays in it. And he keeps thinking she's coming back. It's really just, it's got his humor, but it's also, a very sad. It's very sad what happened in lockdown and how our environment changed so much. So is really interesting. I've been reading that, and I've also been reading a well-known old author. I don't think he's old, although he is oldish. Richard Ford, and I've been reading his most recent collection of stories, A Multitude of Sins. And there's no theme, particularly. Male-female relationships are always a thing with him that he gets into, but he's well known. He wrote The 4th of July, which is a pretty well-known book. He wrote a series of 3 books, and The 4th of July is one of them, and I can't remember the name of the other ones. But if any of your listeners wants to read one of the great authors of our contemporary literature, he is one.
Time for the final break of this podcast. When we come back, a little bit more about what Louise has been reading and a continuation of that conversation. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with Louise Marburg. As a reminder, before the break, Louise was talking about what she had been reading, and she'd mentioned Roddy Doyle and a book set within the pandemic. So just a refresher when we jump back into that conversation, in case you'd forgotten over the break what we'd been talking about. Let's get back to the interview.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, somebody else mentioned Roddy Doyle fairly recently too. I need to check him out, but I don't know. I think for me personally, it might be too soon for pandemic.
Yeah, a little bit.
Like we're still in it. We haven't fully got out of it. I'm not sure if I'm right. In fact, I read a book that was set during the Spanish flu in 1918, and she started, of course, writing it way before COVID. It just was coincidence that it came out during COVID. And even that, I was like, nope, too soon.
Yeah, I know, exactly. I usually, all of my stories have a lot of humor in them. You probably noticed that when you read the book. And the book I'm writing now that I'm just starting is set in the pandemic, but after the first vaccine. So it's not that dire, although it was, I think it's still dire. But so it comes up, is someone wearing a mask? Are they not? That kind of thing. But it's less intense, and that's easier for me. And you can't really write about anything right now without it being, an issue, somewhat of an issue. So hopefully by the time this is published, if it ever gets published, we'll be far from it, or else we'll all be dead from a new one. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on the one hand, I hope that it gets published for you sooner rather than later.
Well, I haven't. I mean, I just started it. I've only got 40 pages, so
okay, that makes
it'll be a while. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Take your time on writing that.
Oh, you know what I wanted to plug, while I'm talking about books I'm reading.
Yes.
I read this a while ago, but the book I'm telling everybody to read is Caste, Caste, by Isabel Wilkerson. And it is a history of racism in our country, and it is mind-blowing.
Yes, I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's incredible. She's a wonderful writer, beautiful writer, and it is just incredible. And I've been telling everybody I know, including I bought it for a friend of mine as a gift. And in the bookstore, this young guy found the book for me, and I said, "Now listen to me." I was like some old coot. This is the best book you could possibly read right now. And I could tell he was like, "Yeah, whatever, boomer,"
This lady's crazy. Yeah.
I know, exactly. So, but I do want to say that it's the best. It's not fiction, obviously, but it was the most memorable book of the past 5 years, I would say, for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Internet presence. I know you have a website, so if you can share any place people can find you and interact with you on the internet, social media, etc.
Okay, well, I do have a website. It's louisemarburg.com. That's easy to remember. And I have, if anybody, lives in the U.S., I have some events I just was in North Carolina. I'm going back to North Carolina. Who knew that you would go twice to North Carolina? And also Texas. So some book festivals. So you can see all that on the website. And also you can buy my other 2 books on the website. And I am on Facebook, love Facebook. Everybody says to me, "Oh, you must curate your Facebook," because I think it's fun. And I love seeing everybody's pictures and hearing about their wonderful things that happen to them. But I don't actually engage I'm not friends with anybody who has very different political ideas from me, not because I don't want to argue about political ideas, but I just don't happen to know anyone that has different political ideas. I guess I live in a bubble. So I don't have fights on Facebook, as some people do. And I'm also on Instagram at Louise Marburg. All of this is just Louise Marburg because I think there's nobody else named Louise Marburg, so it's easy.
Yeah, you do have a name that is, it's not like crazy unique. But I don't think it's very common.
It's not really common, no.
Yeah.
I think, so it's easy. I've never had, I didn't have to get a louisemarburg.net because nobody had taken the domain. So it's, it's good. Yeah.
I also think who knew you could go to North Carolina twice needs to be on a t-shirt or possibly for their tourism.
I know. And, I'd never been I was in Chapel Hill just like yesterday. And it's really very lovely there. And I thought, oh God, it must be really relaxing to live here as opposed to New York City, which is really not relaxing to live.
Right. Yeah. Different paces, I would think.
Yeah, totally different.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, Louise, is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to mention, especially about the new collection or writing in general? Anything that we haven't talked about?
Well, I will say that the new collection was reviewed in the New York Times, which if you don't live in New York, is not a big deal. But if you live in New York or on the East Coast, is kind of a big deal. So I thought that was really cool. And it was also reviewed in the Washington Post. So I had a streak of luck. It was very exciting because short stories are really ignored mostly, certainly by the media. So that was exciting. And I think it's, I think it's the best book I've written. So I encourage everybody to take a look at it.
Well, congratulations. I don't live on the East Coast, but even to me, that's a big deal. So that's really cool.
Okay. That's nice to know. Yeah, I thought it was cool.
Absolutely.
So that's the cool stuff. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking time to talk to me about the collection and to come back on the podcast for a second time. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah. It's been always fun with you.
Thank you so much once again to Louise for joining me to talk about You Have Reached Your Destination. This, I think, is very high on my list. Not I think, I know this is very high on my list of short story collections. Definitely top 5, maybe even higher. I really enjoyed this one. And if you are someone who also enjoys short stories, especially this collection centers around women at various points in their lives and the things that happen to some, many, a lot of women, then you should definitely check out this collection. It is very well written, very enjoyable, and as we talked about toward the beginning, short stories are something that you can read in a relatively small amount of time. If you want to read something before you go to bed, if you just have a few minutes before you leave for work, or while you're commuting, not while you're driving, but if you're commuting by a means where you can actually read, and then something like this would be a good thing to pick up. So like I said, if you are a fan of Louise already, or if you are looking for a new short story collection, or maybe you've never tried reading short stories, lots of reasons to check out this collection of stories by Louise. So thank you to Louise. Thank you, as always, to you, my listeners, without whom I would not have a podcast. I appreciate you all so much. I hope that you will join me for the next episode. I will have another returning author. Stephanie Kane is returning for her 3rd appearance on the podcast. And usually when she's here, we talk about her crime novels. We are going to be talking about the true crime book that she has written. And in this case, the true crime involves something that happened in her own life, so very close to home, and I'm looking forward to having her back on the podcast and talking about that experience with her. We talked a little bit about it the last time she was on the podcast, and it is a pretty fascinating story, so join me for that episode. In the meantime, as always, if you are able to and willing to help out the podcast, there's a few things that you can do. First is to like, subscribe, follow whatever platform you listen to the podcast on. That not only helps us, but it gives you notifications whenever there is a new episode. Also, reviewing this podcast, giving a review, a rating, a starred review, a written review. Anything helps, as I have always said, to get this podcast out to more listeners. And finally, follow the podcast on social media. I love hearing from you. You can follow it on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Thank you, as always, for joining me. I hope you're having a really great week. If you celebrate Valentine's Day, hope it's been great. Whatever you have done. For me, I really just like to eat chocolate and hang out with my hubby. Really any excuse to eat chocolate and hang out with my hubby. It's not a bad way to go. But I hope you're having a great week. Hope that you continue having a great week, and I hope that your week affords you plenty of time, as always, to get yourself lost in a good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.